So, what are our goals today? We're going to talk about the whole process from beginning to end. We're going to go over the eligibility requirements. Not everyone can apply. We're going to talk about the various steps that an applicant goes through. We're going to talk about the components of the test. And then at the end, we're going to discuss what resources are available to you to use either as tutors or as a student on your own. And I will have materials out here on this table. So if after we're done, you want to take a few minutes, look at those, ask me any questions, you can do that as well. And again, for those of you who might have come in a little late, I don't have lunch, but I do have water. So if at any point you'd like to get a bottle of water, please help yourself. Okay, so some people hear this word naturalization and think, well, what is that? What does that mean? You know, does it mean citizenship? Does it mean something different? Basically, it means the same. So naturalization is the process by which a foreign citizen fulfills the requirements that they must fulfill to become a U.S. citizen. So those terms are pretty much interchangeable. Who's in charge of this? Who administers the test? Okay, well, there's an agency of the United States government called the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services Division. And I always refer to it as the USCIS. The USCIS. A lot of acronyms in the U.S. government. This is one that I've become very familiar with. So it is an agency within the Department of Homeland Security. Okay, so becoming a citizen requires doing a lot of things. One of the things that the USCIS does is conducts background checks on applicants, okay, and checks all their records to make sure that they don't have anything in their past that would prevent them from becoming a citizen. How is the USCIS funded? Mostly from the fees that they charge for various things that they do, including citizenship. Okay, so they don't receive much taxpayer money. It's mostly funded by their fees. Okay. So how do people want to become a U.S. citizen? I mean, it certainly is possible to live in the United States for many, many years as a legal permanent resident with a green card and not become a citizen. Okay? And a lot of people do that. Okay? Why might people want to become a citizen? Here are some reasons. Okay? Sorry, the print is so small, but voting in federal elections is a big one. So we had a lot of people who came through the system in time to vote in this past presidential election. They were really motivated by that. Okay. Serve on a jury, okay, one of the responsibilities of a U.S. citizen. I teach citizenship classes from time to time. I'm often surprised by how unfamiliar people are from other countries with the jury system and the trial by one's peers. Okay, so that is a responsibility and privilege for U.S. citizens. Number 3 is a big one, travel with a U.S. passport. Okay, so some people come from countries where the situation at home can be a little scary for a lot of reasons. And so having the knowledge that they have that U.S. passport, that they can come and go freely in and out of the United States, and that if something should happen to them when they're visiting maybe their home country, relatives who are still there, that the U.S. government and the U.S. embassy will be on their side if something should happen to them. There are also certain restrictions on how much time you have to spend in the United States if you want to become a citizen. Once you have a passport, of course, you can travel freely when and where you want for as long as you want. Bringing family members. So many people, of course, want to bring family members, and if you're a U.S. citizen, you get some preference. If you become a citizen, Any children under the age of 18 become a citizen along with you if they were born outside the United States. You can apply for federal jobs. I think I read that our new president has put a freeze on federal hiring, but assuming that that gets lifted at some point, new citizens can apply for federal jobs, run for federal office, okay, and become eligible for certain grants and scholarships. Okay, so these are some of the reasons that people are willing to go to the effort and expense of becoming a new citizen. Any questions so far?
The last one?
Yes?
Government benefits, what kind of benefits?
You know, I think there are limits. I'm not 100% sure about this, but I think there are maybe limits on Social Security payments for people who are non-citizens, even though they're permanent residents. So it means that they can continue or get more consistent payments over time.
So they would have less limits.
Less limits, right? So let's look at a few statistics. All right. So on average, every year, about 680,000 people become new citizens. For the past fiscal year, the countries that we received most new citizens from were Mexico, India, the Philippines, China, and the Dominican Republic. Where are you from? Liberia. And the national pass rate is at 91%. So that's good. However, if you don't pass for an individual, that's a pretty bad and difficult thing. So what we want to try to do here, of course, is to get everyone as prepared and over-prepared as we possibly can so that they can pass the test. Yes?
Is there research available on the cause of failure? Is there a predominant motif for why?
You know, not that I have read, but I guess I would just guess it's lack of preparation. So some people think they can do this on their own. I think there are a lot of American citizens who wouldn't pass the test if they hadn't prepared. And probably their English, for some subset, their English language skills are not high enough to pass the speaking and listening part. So if you do go and take the exam and you fail one part of it, you have a second chance to go back and try to pass just that part of the test that you failed. If you don't pass it the second time, then you have to start all over again and pay the fee again.
So do you have a certain amount of time to retake that second part?
They tell you when you are supposed to come back, so they give you an appointment. You don't choose. It's usually, I think, a couple months, something like that.
Not very long.
Not very long, but again, it's only for one small piece of that. Any questions? All right. Who can apply? Well, you have to be 18 years old. You must have been a permanent resident. A lot of times we refer to this as having a green card for 5 years. Okay? Unless you're married to an American, and then it's 3 years. There are certain residency requirements. You can't spend lots and lots of time outside the United States while you're going through this process. You have to be able to demonstrate you've had continuous residency. You have to demonstrate that you can read, write, and speak basic English. Okay, and they evaluate this during the interview and on the test. Have a basic understanding of U.S. history and government. These are the 100 questions. So again, this is who is eligible. And this information is going to be in a handout that I'm going to give you. So if you missed a little bit, that's okay. You'll get it later. All right, so you have to have a basic understanding of those 100 questions. They're about history, civics, symbols, holidays, and so forth. And then also be a person of good moral character and demonstrate an attachment to the principles of the U.S. Constitution.
How is that determined?
Well, on the N400 application that every applicant has to fill out, which is like 20 pages long, they ask many, many questions about your background, and also a number of have you ever questions. We'll get to that in a little bit. So they ask a lot of questions about what organizations you belong to, what associations you've had, and so forth. We'll go into that in a little bit more detail as we go forward.
Do
Yes.
they give character references?
No. But they do checks.
And the questions would include this attachment to the principal?
Yes, yes it does. And then when you take the oath of allegiance, that also requires you to state publicly that you are that you support the United States.
Do you have a question?
Yeah. Question. Before you get naturalized to be a citizen, do you have to pay money?
You have to pay money to apply.
Because
It's $680. But it's possible in some cases to get a fee waiver, which means you don't have to pay, or get a reduction in your fee. And we're going to talk about that too.
question number 2, you can be natural like Charlottesville here,
You can.
you can take tests here.
You cannot take the test here, but you will be sworn in. You will take the oath of allegiance here. We have the ceremony after to become, that's the final stage of becoming a citizen. And we're going to talk about that more too. Keep asking me questions. All right, so there are some exceptions for people who are a little older, okay? So if you're 50 or older and you've been in the United States for 20 years, or you're 55 and older, and you've been here for 15 years, you can take the civics exam, the 100 questions, in your native language. However, you have to bring an interpreter with you who speaks both English and your language. Okay? I don't know if anybody's in that category. Okay. So what are the steps? What do you need to do to apply? All right, well, of course, you're going to study for the interview and the test. How long you study and how much you study depends on the individual, right? Someone from Canada who speaks English as their first language, who's been here for 12 years, is going to be able to study for maybe a month, right? Someone who came here with maybe not much education, not much background in U.S. history, civics, governance, and a low level of English is going to need to study for a lot longer. Okay, so it's going to vary a lot as to when you begin that study process. When you feel like you're almost ready and you're eligible, usually 5 years, then you're going to submit the N400 application. Okay? So that is that 20-page application form that you must fill out, asking all those detailed questions. All right? So the fee is $640 to apply, and then an $85 fee for what they call biometrics. Biometrics are fingerprints and photographs. Okay? And they use that information to do a background check on each and every applicant. Okay, so after you submit your A400 application, a couple of months will go by. Then you will get a letter from the USCIS saying, please come up to Northern Virginia in Alexandria and have your biometrics appointment. So you go up there, go to the office, fingerprints, and you take some pictures. Go back home. You wait another couple of months. Then you get another letter from the USCIS that says, please come to the interview. So you go back up to Northern Virginia and have that interview. If you pass, you go back home and you wait for your appointment to have your oath of allegiance. You are officially sworn in as a U.S. citizen. This whole process can take six plus months. Okay? So So once you've applied, you don't immediately have to be able to pass the test, but you need to be in pretty good shape to do that. And you can continue to study during that period of time. So the wait time varies depending on how much of a backlog the USCIS has. In recent years, they've had a big backlog, so it's taken a bit longer. That time frame can vary. Mark, did you have a question?
Yes, test equals interview, or is there a separate?
Yeah, they happen together, okay? So an applicant will meet with a USCIS officer. The officer will interview the applicant about information that he has provided on his N400 application. Then the officer will give the test. Yeah, in that same interview. So, the oath of allegiance, or the swearing-in ceremony, usually takes place right across the Staples parking lot at the federal courthouse. Okay? Those ceremonies take about an hour. They're open to the public, so if you'd like to go see one, you can. It's a very nice ceremony. There's a federal judge that runs it. He's got a very nice way about him. He's very inclusive. And even the new citizens are given an opportunity to stand up in the courtroom and share their thoughts. It's a nice ceremony. So most of the ceremonies take place over there with the exception of July the 4th, which takes place up at Monticello. All right. Now, when you apply for naturalization, you can get low, reduced cost help from the International Rescue Committee, which has an office here in town. Okay? So for most people who have a very straightforward application, they don't have any complicating background factors, they can call the IRC, get an appointment with a woman there named Nada. Have any of you met Nada? Yes, you've met Nada? Okay. She has the certification that is necessary to help people complete their N400. Okay. Now, as tutors, this is really important to understand. We cannot practice law without a license. That means we cannot help students fill out the form, tell them what answers to put. Okay. We're not certified, qualified, licensed to do that. NADA has that certification, and immigration lawyers here in Charlottesville do as well. We don't. What we can do, though, is help our students understand the questions that are on the test and the vocabulary and the terms, which are daunting and difficult. Okay?
Even for somebody who speaks English.
Okay, so Lynn's had some experience with this.
It's a long form. So I mean, if you're frustrated on question 4, when you get to question 80, you're ready to flip the table.
And I've heard,
As an English speaker.
yes, I've heard varying accounts of this. Some people, will tell me, oh, he just asked me, where do I work? How long have I lived at my current address? When was I married? And that was it. But I did have a student who told me that the interviewer asked him all the questions. So, that's pretty crazy. Okay. Any questions about this before we go on? Somebody's phone? So as I was saying earlier, some people can qualify for a fee waiver. That means you don't have to pay at all, or a reduced fee, okay? So, if you're interested in this, if you're not, just leave these on the table. But this does tell you what the guidelines are for those waivers and reductions. So, for example, if your household income is $36,450 and you have a family of 4 or less than that, you may qualify for a fee waiver. You don't have to pay. Get a lower fee, a reduced fee, if your household income falls between 150% and 200% of the federal poverty So when you go to apply, whether it's with NADA at the IRC or whether you work with an immigration lawyer, be sure to bring this up if you feel like you might qualify. Okay? I'm not sure that, it's not necessarily for sure that that person will mention it to you. So be sure to request it, ask about it if you think you might qualify. Any questions about this? Components of the test. Okay. So the 100 questions, you have to learn all of them. Okay. You have to get 6 answers correct during the interview, and you get 10 chances. So you can miss 1, 2, 3, 4 questions and still pass that part of the test. Okay. Answer 6 out of 10 questions correctly. Then you have to correctly read one sentence and correctly write one dictated sentence.
Where do we get study for that?
So there are vocabulary lists for both of these. And then in a book like this, or in our pamphlet, there are some practice writing sentences. So at the back of this book, there's some practice writing sentences. Okay, so, yes.
Is that on a, like an 8th level or a 6th level?
Yeah, I would say that's fair. Yes, did you have a question? Yes, absolutely. Okay, and then finally, you have to demonstrate your ability to speak English based on answers to questions normally asked during the interview. So Glenn and I were discussing this ahead of time. There's some good videos on YouTube, on the USCIS site, that shows mock interviews. Very good to watch because it shows you exactly kind of what to expect when you go in to have your interview. But what's going to happen is you're going to go back up to Northern Virginia. You're going to go to the USCIS office, go in, go through a metal detector, have a seat out in the waiting room. Eventually, they'll call your name, and the officer will greet you. And she might say, hello, nice to meet you. Is it still raining outside? Did you have any trouble finding our office? What's the weather like? This chit-chat. So she's being pleasant, but she's also assessing your English. Okay, so just being able to respond in an appropriate manner to simple conversational cues like that is important. Okay? Also to be able to follow commands once you get into the office. Please be seated. Please stand up. Please raise your right hand. Repeat after me. Please sign here. So as tutors, you're working with a student, you need to make sure that your student can appropriately respond to those sorts of conversation cues. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the 100 questions. Okay, so here's a sampling. Most of you are probably familiar with these both thus far. Give you a little idea of what they're like. So the idea of self-government is in the first 3 words of the Constitution. What are these words? We the people. Who is the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court? John Roberts. What is the economic system in the United States? Capitalism or market economy? Both acceptable answers. Who wrote the Declaration of Independence?
Hold on.
Very good. Thomas Jefferson, our own TJ, right here from Charlottesville. Who was president during World War I? Wilson, Woodrow Wilson. How many voting members in the U.S. House of Representatives? 435. Okay. So, am I really smart because I know all the answers to these questions? No. It's just because this is what I do. But if you had asked me, given me this test randomly, 5 years ago, could I have passed? I don't know. I don't know. I think a lot of American citizens that you would randomly pick from the street could not pass it. So it does require study. It does require study. So you were asking about the vocabulary
Look
list.
at this.
Yes, okay. So what we don't know about that reading sentence is what the sentence will be. The USCIS does not give us sentences. They give us the 100 questions. We know what those are. We know what the right answers are. But we don't know what sentence will be given to us. Okay? But we do know that the sentence will be composed of these words. Okay? And that sentence that an applicant has to read is a question. It's in the form of a question. So, tutors, it's important that our student know those question words. How, what, when, where, who, when. Okay. Right. So we have a copy of this up in the library. It's available online as well at the USCIS site. So for example, these sentences, these questions actually, are composed from the words that were on the previous page. Who is the father of our country? What colors are on the American flag? Now, you don't have to answer that. You just have to be able to read that. Okay? And same is true for the writing vocabulary. So writing for some of our students is probably the hardest part. Okay? Speak well, understand pretty well, practice those 100 questions, but having a sentence dictated to them, something like the words Columbus Day, or White House, or New York City, California, Memorial Day, that can be a challenge. We don't know what the sentence will be. You do get 3 chances to write one correctly.
How important is the spelling?
So there are guidelines that the USCIS publishes, so we can know, how closely they require this to be. The question is pretty close, but not perfect. Okay? So something like capitalization is not going to prevent you from becoming a citizen. But it needs to be close enough that I would say any reasonable person would be able to read it. It has to be close, but not perfect. So for example, here are some sample writing questions. So again, this would be the USCIS officer will give you a piece of paper and a pen. Say, listen to the words I'm going to say. I'm going to dictate a sentence to you. You have to write it without seeing the words. So, George Washington is the father of our country. Flag is red, white, and blue. Independence Day is in July. California has the most. So these are examples. So what happens at the interview? Okay. So applicants need to demonstrate that they can speak basic English. Okay? Like you would have in a conversation or small talk. Again, how are you today? Please come with me. Did you have trouble parking? Following commands. Seat, sign here. Then you need to be able to answer questions based on your N400 application. And this is where it gets challenging for some people, for sure. So personal information about what is your current address, how many children do you have, where were they born, what is your date of birth, what is your A number, your permanent resident card. Even harder than that, where did you go to school? Where was your spouse born? Okay. Maybe you've been married more than once. Where was your first husband? Okay. So that personal information, you have to be able to respond to those questions. And then there are the good moral character and have you ever questions. And again, these are evident from the N400 application if you look at that, but there are also some practice have you ever questions in this booklet as well. Glenn, have you been practicing, those?
Yes,
Yeah.
I think that's the one that gets overlooked real fast of the, like, because we went through it once when when she filled out the paperwork, but then you get very hung up on the 100 questions and the reading and the writing.
And it can actually be a little uncomfortable to have to go over these questions with someone. You feel that they're intrusive, and I'll show you what I mean by that.
Especially, what I was gonna make a comment about, especially, I work with someone who's a different sex than I am, a different gender. So there are some questions in there that are, so like explaining, that's why I say, like explaining some of the words, explaining prostitution.
Right. So one of the questions is, have you ever engaged in prostitution? So it's uncomfortable to talk about that, perhaps, but every applicant needs to at least know what that means. So here's some examples of some of the vocabulary that appears on the N400 applications. These are important terms to understand, but also kind of difficult. So that should be marital status now. See?
Talking about
Got that?
trophy wife. Talking about the new meaning, there's trophy wife.
Oh, thank you, autocorrect. So here are some examples of the have you ever questions. These come right off the N400 application. Have you been a member of any organization, party, club, or society in any country? Okay, you know, so have you been a member of a church? Okay, you have to answer that. You've been a member of the parent-teacher association. Yes. You've been a member of a political party, maybe in your country. It's a lot of information to kind of recall and be able to put down on your form. So a little holdover from the Cold War. Have you ever been a member of the Communist Party? There's also a question about, have you ever had an association with the Nazi Party? Most people were not even born at that time. But it's still on the N400. They ask you questions about your taxes. Okay, so you want to make sure your taxes are all in order. How about this one? Committed or attempted to commit a crime for which you were not arrested. Okay. One that maybe nobody even knows about. Okay. But I do know that the people who assist with filling out these forms say that it is imperative, very important to be 100% honest. So even a traffic ticket from a couple of years ago, even if you got stopped but you weren't ticketed, it's probably best to go ahead and refill that in your and just be honest and upfront about it. Because the worst case is that you've done something, then during that background check they discover that you did do something that you did not put on your application. How about this one? Had a hereditary title or order of nobility. It's really hard to explain if you've never had any knowledge of that. Yeah, so as I was saying, most tutors who work with citizenship students are very well informed about it, but occasionally we'll have a tutor who will say, okay, we've gone through those 100 questions, we're all set. That's good. But it's not all that's required to pass the test. How about these? These are those moral character questions that we were talking about earlier. Okay. So for most everybody, all the answers are going to be no, 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 and no. But just to be on the absolute safe side, we do want to make sure that every applicant is familiar with these terms enough to know what it means and answer appropriately. Any questions, comments so far? All right. So once you pass the test, you go home. You wait a little while longer. You're not a U.S. citizen yet. You have to wait until you have your oath ceremony. Oath meaning promise. A very solemn, serious promise. Then you will be scheduled for your oath ceremony. As I said, it usually takes place right over here at the federal courthouse. If it doesn't happen at Monticello on July the 4th, and that's random, you can't choose to do that. So it's just where you are in the process. And then you will go, usually at 9 o'clock. The ceremony doesn't begin at 11. So the officers of the court spend a lot of time with you, help you get ready, ask you any questions, answer any questions, and provide you with a copy of the oath, which you will repeat. You'll have a copy of it. Okay? This is just basically saying that you support the institutions of the United States and that your loyalty now as a citizen is to the United States. You are finally a citizen. Now, what resources have you been using? So for example, Glenn, what have you been using with your student to study?
There's the small little pamphlet that you have there.
Yeah.
There's the larger red one that actually has all the questions in it.
Mhm.
It has the CD in the back.
Mm-hmm.
The flashcards, like I said, YouTube. There's a few other Google things, sites.google, so I get practice written questions. There's one that is actually kind of nice. It actually gives you the words and makes them put it into correct order, which kind of works for both reading and for writing. So they're not actually writing the words. I literally I bring my iPad in and I Googled practice citizenship writing tests. So there's the first one is the one that I use quite a bit. It's citizenshipstudyguide.com. That's one of them. And it's it gives me, I think it's 8 or 10 questions or sentences to read, to write, and I just take the writing ones and read them to her, or the reading ones. And either way, I think that's a bit of it. Plus, there's a book on Thomas Jefferson's or a history book that's about the 8th grade level, so that she gets used to reading and saying words that she doesn't necessarily know, and she reads a little bit more about events as we go along. So it's not just Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence. She actually reads a little bit about what went on at the conventions,
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
And really having more context is a wonderful thing.
Yes.
One of the nice things about this book,
That's-
I use a lot, is it has lots of nice pictures in it. And so as you know, we can use our knowledge to sort of supplement just the very basic question and answer.
Is that what we get when we go to the start classes?
That they will get this in my class that starts tomorrow.
Yes.
Right, so good. So so if you have access to technology, if your student has a computer at home, lots of ways to study online. I know some students also have an app on their phone, so smartphone that just has the 100 questions, so you're waiting for the bus or sitting in a waiting room or something, you can practice that way as well. So let me just quickly show you this up. So this is the Citizenship Resource Center webpage sponsored by the USCIS. So this is the official website. So when you go to look for this, the best way to find it is to Google Citizenship Resource Center. If you just Google citizenship, you're just going to get a ton of stuff. Okay? So Citizenship Resource Center. And you'll notice over here, under this tab for learners, okay, all kinds of information for a learner about how to apply, should I apply, again, these eligibility requirements, and then here, study for the test. So, I don't want that. So over here, some interactive tests that you can access to practice at home. From teachers, we have this tab, and down here we have lesson plans and activities. We have 2 levels, beginning level and intermediate level. These are more for a classroom teacher, but I think you could, use them yourself and highlight particular things that you're working on. And so there's a whole set of these. So there's a lesson on the Bill of Rights, there's a lesson on equality and freedom. So a nice supplement to a textbook if you're using it, and one advantage of these is it has very nice pictures. We've also installed computers now in most of the tutoring rooms, so if you can get in and get one of those, you can go online and use some of these as well. Then we have the flashcards, which we used to be able to get pretty easily. Now they're very stingy with them, but we do have a few sets of these. They are a little outdated. We've had someone go through and try to correct them, but just be aware that some answers have changed because of the recent election. Okay. The vocabulary words here. Again, if you like working with flashcards, there are several sets of this. We have these in Spanish as well, for Spanish speakers. Although I'd say if you can learn the English first, that's probably a better choice. Someone mentioned, I think it was Glenn, this book. So when you apply, after your application goes through, as an applicant, you'll be sent this book. This has a CD in the back, okay, that helps you practice the 100 questions. But I will say, the answers are lengthy. It's written at a fairly high level. We have a couple of books that are very good to use. So this is by far, I think, the most straightforward book. It focuses really just on the questions. It has reading practice and writing practice. I'm starting a new citizenship class tomorrow. We'll be using this textbook. So it's just kind of the backbone of citizenship instruction, for me anyway. If you have a citizenship student, ask Stephen, and he can give you a copy of this book to use with your student. For beginner levels, like levels 1 and 2, you can start with this. By the same author, her name's Lynn Weintraub, but it's a lot more focused on really basic stuff like spelling. For a more advanced student, you might want to use a book like this, U.S. Citizen, yes. You can see there's a lot more reading in here. But it also helps provide context for a student who's interested in U.S. history and wants to learn more and has a more intermediate level. So lots of resources out there, more than you need. It's just basically also just identifying kind of where your student is, what the gaps are, what you need to emphasize, and finding maybe the right materials that work for you and your student. Okay. Couple more things. We have this book also up in the library. This is a series of lessons as well for citizenship. It's published by the Catholic Legal Immigration Network, and it's a very nice booklet. You can feel free to take pages out and copy them. Whole series of lessons that cover all the 100 questions. Also gives background about the interview. And then they also publish this, which I think is a really nice little resource. Good thing to build a lesson around. This is Miguel's naturalization interview, presented in sort of a graphic novel scenario, telling about his journey towards citizenship. And on the back, it also has some tips and information about the process. So again, not to overload you, there are just lots of ways to go at this. And if you want help figuring out what to use,